Welcome back, Middle Age Grind. And today I want to share some highlights of a book I read. I'm going to show it to you here. I always like giving due credit. Psychology of Money. This is by Morgan Housel. And my brother-in-law, Todd, gave me this book. He's traveling a lot now, and he picked this up. I don't know if it was in the airport or in a bookstore. Because, man, I read this and I thought of you. And I wanted to share some quick takeaways from this book that I thought were meaningful and maybe can help you. And if you'd like to read the book, you can go check it out. This is some of the things I taught from the book. And the book first starts out with a story, okay? And it's a lot of these what I like about this book, it's 20-something chapters. It was a quick read. I knocked it out in 2 nights. It goes over a lot of stories about real people. A lot of them you know, a lot of them you don't know, but it's real stories that help you out. And the book starts off with a story about 2 different people. And the author worked at a valet at a fancy hotel in LA in his teens or 20s. And it was about a guy, he didn't name him, he was a tech guy, came around, Porsches, whatever, and flashed around stacks of money. And he would get drunk and break lamps in the hotel. And they would say, "Sir, it's $500. He'd throw $5,000 and say, "Get out of my face." Needless to say, in a couple of years, that guy went broke, all right? Second story is about a janitor and a gas station attendant in Vermont. And I've read this before. A guy's name was Ronald Reed. He was from rural Vermont, just an unassuming guy, graduated high school, never inherited money, never won the lottery. He worked at a gas station for his brother-in-law, I think, for 25 years. Had an early retirement, got kind of bored. Then he worked as a janitor for another 20 years or so. Was married once. His wife died pretty young, so he was a widower. He died in 2014 at 92 years old, and he had a net worth over $8 million. And you say, man, how did he get the money? What's going on there? He invested in basically blue chip dividend stocks. He had about a portfolio of maybe 30 stocks. So think Coca-Cola, IBM, blue chip companies over 60, 70 years. Okay. And he ended up with that kind of money. He had 2 stepkids. He gave them each $1 million, and he donated the other 6 to his public library and hospital in his hometown of Vermont. Guy lived a very frugal, unassuming life. Nobody had a clue he had this kind of money. He wore old clothes, and just what he did. It's pretty cool, I thought. Goes over a lot of stuff. One of the questions, and this guy's name's Angus Campbell, they said, what is the definition of financial independence or whatever? And his simple quote was, having a sense of control of one's life. Think about that, all right? Another thing I liked about this, they talked about John D. Rockefeller, which, if you know from history, was the oil tycoon. Probably the richest man in the history of the world. Even in today's dollars, I read things, he'd be worth, inflation adjusted, his fortune would be somewhere around $1 trillion today. So he'd be even bigger than Musk and Bezos and Bill Gates, all those guys. But the thing about him, he rarely talked. He listened. Even when he was around a room with important people, he was richer than all of them. And he listened 90% of the time and talked very little. So I should tell you a lot about doing some good things. This is what I thought was a cool story about Bill Gates, Paul Allen, and a guy you probably never heard of named Kent Evans. Bill Gates and Paul Allen co-founded Microsoft. Well, in the late 60s, they were high school students. And at their high school in the Seattle area, I believe was a suburb, I was a World War II vet who was like, supportive of the school, and the mom's club, the PTA, so to speak, had a rummage sale, and they raised like over $3,000. And he convinced the school, the mom's club, to buy basically a school computer in 1968, I believe. So they did, and this was the only high school in America to have a computer. And Bill Gates and his friends Paul Allen and Kent Evans, they just soaked up every minute of it. That's all they did in their spare time. And his thing is, I forget how many high schools there were in the country, maybe 30,000 at the time, how many students. There were 2,000 students in the school, and Bill Gates happened to be one of those students in the school. It's just the numbers, the chances are so improbable. And then he goes on to create the company. And Kent Evans, who, listening to Bill Gates and Paul Allen, maybe were smarter than both of them, was definitely as ambitious. You never heard of him because he died at 18 in a mountain accident hiking. So the chances of that would happen are even smaller too. But life is full of small chances. This one kind of hit home for me, and I'm going to tell you what it is. The title of the chapter was something like this: nobody's crazy. And what this deals with is everybody's perspective on money is unique because things that happen to them in their life are so unique to them that it makes an indelible impression. So it's kind of like when you grew up, what was going on in the economy. And I'll give you an example. Raised by two wonderful parents here, my mom and dad. They were born in the 1960s, both of them, and they grew up in the 70s. They're coming up teenagers. And I remember my dad saying, "Man, Ross, it was bad. Like inflation. You'd go to the store every week, bread was going up, gas lines. It was the economy. I mean, talk about, we had inflation recently, but the job market was solid. Hard to find jobs." And lo and behold, my mom and dad had me. They were pretty young. My dad was still in college. And my dad got a good job at a company when I was, I guess, right after he graduated. And I was about a year. And I never forget this. And he tells the story, but I remember some of it too. In 1986, I was 4 years old. So I remember this. I was at my babysitter's house, Lou and Sassoot, great people. And I remember him coming to pick me up from there. And he tells them, "I got laid off today." And they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Dwayne." I'm 4. I don't know what that means, And found out pretty quick what that meant. And he told the story. He goes, and what it wasn't, he wasn't doing a good job. It was just the economy sucked and they had to make cuts, and it was across the board. A whole bunch of people got laid off. And he was making pretty good money in there. This was 1986. And he said, when they told me in the office, whatever, I'm like, okay. And he's like, I went home and he saw my little bike outside. And he said, I broke down because it was his son. My mom had a job at the bank, but, as a man, he realized, what I'm going to do. I lost a good job, and that's what he said. And then it took him a little while to get his next job, which he retired from. We moved to the New Orleans area. This was down at Cutoff. And he worked at Murphy Oil. And I remember my dad saying this. He goes, he was the youngest one at the time in the lab. He worked in the laboratory. This was an oil refinery. And he says, I wanted to learn everything there was to learn, every job in that lab, because I wanted to be indispensable. He wanted to be where the next time something like that happened, which it did not, by the way, to that extent, I guess you'd say. Some people might have got laid off years later at this company, but he wanted to learn every job to where if the company was going to shut down, he was going to be the last one to be let go. And that stayed with him. And he ended up becoming lab manager. I think he might have even been 30 yet. And he retired at 55. And he was in that position the whole time. And I know he got offers from other companies because he was really good at his job. And he would kind of talk, but he never really entertained and chased the dollar, even though he made very good money where he was at. But that chapter kind of brought that back to life to me. Him getting laid off at, I guess he was 25 or 26 with a young child, that stayed with him. And when he got that next job and he was appreciative and he was a company man and they took care of him financially. We lived my sister and I, look, we lived a very privileged, good life from our parents because of their hard work. My mom worked at the post office for over 20 years and at the bank before that. But it just goes to show you, if someone was raised by Depression era parents or an inflationary time, we're going to have our own views about money. So I just thought that was pretty cool. Then the last thing, and I thought this was the most important thing that I took from the book. It was a story about somebody who had wrote some books. I think he wrote Catch-22 and some other ones. I made a decent, I want to say fortune, but nest egg, whatever. He was older and was at a party, and a young hotshot guy, and of course, net worth came up. And he says, this young guy tells this guy who made the money, he goes, man, it took you 30 years to make that. I made more in 2 years selling my company. And the guy who wrote the book, the older guy, says, yeah, that's true. He says, but you know what? I'll have something you'll never have. And the guy says, what's that? And he goes, enough. Having enough. Look, if you compare yourself to other people in the world we live in today, unless you're Elon Musk, there's always going to be a bigger dog out there. There's going to be someone who makes more money. Look, if Michael Jordan goes to a party, Michael's worth $2-3 billion, and Mark Zuckerberg's there, Michael Jordan, if you're going to compare just on that, you're going to feel like a failure, even though he's not. And that just kind of struck home with me too. And a lot about these books about money and accumulating wealth. I don't think there's enough out there about knowing when's enough, and knowing to quit playing the game when you hit a certain age. You need to get a little bit more conservative in retirement years and that kind of thing, and just realizing, kind of like in that statement Angus Campbell made, having a sense of control of one life. Look, if you got a nest egg and you got different things coming in, whether it be Social Security, some pensions, some dividends, some interest, and you can live off of that and pretty much do what you want, you've made it, So wanted to share that book with you today, and hope you have a good weekend coming up, and I'll see you soon on the Middle Age Grind.